Penn State Blitz on Penn Live is back. Greg Pickel.
Bob.
There's only one thing we really need to talk about after what happened in Indianapolis over the weekend, and that's the NFL Scouting Combine.
Yes.
Penn State owned it.
Yeah.
They had 8 players there, and I think everyone kind of thought they had a chance to do really well, but I think they even exceeded maybe their own expectations, and it wasn't just Saquon Barkley and Mike Gesicki. There were some other players for Penn State that really just, I think the analysts were surprised, and just your thoughts on the combine and what you'll remember most years from now.
Yeah, I think that when you look at the start of Penn State's strength and conditioning program under Dwight Galt 4 years ago, there were subtle hints that Penn State would eventually get to this point, and 4 years later, it didn't hurt that he had some freak athletes work out under him, but there's some other guys too that have turned out numbers that maybe most didn't expect. Yeah,
so Saquon Barkley, I don't know if he could have had a better combine when it came to running and jumping, and he was a consensus top 5 pick in the draft late April before the combine, but I think the 4.41, the 40-inch vertical jump, that was on Friday, and you're thinking, well, that's a pretty nice story, and that's probably going to be it for Penn State. Then Mike Gesicki takes the field on Saturday, and for a guy that's 6'5", 6'6", almost 250 pounds, you could argue he put up numbers that probably were better than Barkley's.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right, Bob. I think that when you look at what he was able to do, I think you called him Money Mike after that. You're right. I mean, Mark Andrews, the kid from Oklahoma, I think was ahead of him on most draft boards. And I think the consensus was that Andrews had a disappointing combine, whereas Gesicki had what most considered to be a better combine than expected, which is interesting because if you followed along with his career, he was always going to test well. I mean, he was pretty much built to do this since his high school days.
Right.
And you add him into a program that again, run by Dwight Galt and his staff, that focuses on combine testing year-round for 4 years. And these guys are all going to be at a point, I think. Now, granted, they won't all have the athleticism and the abilities that Barkley and Gesicki have, but you're going to see guys do things that maybe, again, that's not expected of them. Because of that, Gesicki's numbers were impressive. Someone's going to take him. I think, he's definitely in the first-round conversation or early second at this point. Someone's going to want him to do what Jimmy Graham was able to do with the Saints or something along those lines, maybe a Rob Gronkowski type, obviously, maybe not quite as big as him. But, certainly he upped his stock, no question about it.
Yeah, I think the pecking order for Penn State in the draft's kind of been established. We had talked, Saquon certainly looks like not just a top 5 pick, but probably in the discussion to be top 3, maybe even number 1 overall with that combine performance. But now it's Mike Gesicki is probably the next guy that's probably going to go off the boards. We had talked about Marcus Allen and some other players, but really I think Mike separated himself. I think, during the combine, Greg Olsen of the Panthers was on field kind of watching him work out, and he talked about the fact that, it's okay if he's not a great blocker. If he goes to the right team that'll use him the right way, he can go very early in the draft. But he just has to get to a right fit, a team that wants to. You mentioned Jimmy Graham, a team that's going to use him as a passing game weapon and not get too concerned if he can't really help out as a run blocker. Greg, but those are only 2 of the 8 players for Penn State at the combine. We can get to some others, and some of them chose not to run, and for different reasons. DaeSean Hamilton, Christian Campbell, they did not run. I don't think Jason Cabinda ran either. Just your thoughts on maybe the decision making for some of those guys. The combine isn't just about 40 times. It's about meeting with clubs. It's about passing the medical exams. It's about the interviews. So even though they were there and they didn't really test or they didn't run, there's still, I think, a lot that they were able to accomplish out there.
Yeah, there's no question about it. I mean, I think start with Hamilton to wrap up the offense. This is a guy that during the month of January between the Shrine Game and the Senior Bowl, he really didn't have time to work on the techniques and things like that, the fundamentals to go into the 40 and things of that nature, because he was going from one All-Star game to one he did not expect to play in, but obviously wanted to play in because it helped boost his draft stock. But he was quite clear. The report said that he was going to not run because he didn't have time to work on it. He'll run at Penn State's Pro Day. And if there was ever a year, at least in my mind, Bob, for you to not work out and do everything at the combine, it's this year. Why? Because every NFL team's coming to State College, and most years they do. It's not every year, though. Sometimes teams have not shown up. There's been maybe 3/4 of the NFL teams there. They're all coming this year. There's a lot of guys, so you're going to get a chance to work out in front of everybody. There's the private workouts, of course. So if you were a little banged up, if things weren't exactly the way you wanted them, it made sense to wait. Obviously, these guys all have agents that, help them make those decisions. But, clearly those guys all had a plan in mind, and they didn't run. But most of them did. The other workouts, Campbell, you mentioned, we'll get to in a bit. But, Hamilton seemed to do everything else pretty well. And his month of January really, I think, is what's going to help him shoot up draft boards come April.
Yeah, the Penn State Pro Day, I believe, is March 20th. Yeah. It's a Tuesday. It was interesting to hear Steve Smith, the former wideout who played with the Ravens and the Panthers, talked about what he saw from Hamilton. And he said it didn't really matter to him what he may or may not be able to do in the 40. Mm-hmm. He said his ability as a route runner and a complete receiver, he was really impressed with Hamilton. I think we're talking about, I think, at the end of the season, the question was, would DaeSean Hamilton get drafted? Would he be a late pick? I think it's pretty clear that he will get drafted, and he has a chance, I think, probably to be a mid-round pick, and he's come a long way since the start of the season, if you really think about it. He had disappeared from the Penn State offense in 2015 and 2016, so he's kind of reinvented himself, and a product of some really hard work. Good for him. Let's get to a couple other Penn State guys. Marcus Allen, Christian Campbell. We're saving the best for last with Troy Apke, the defensive back who on Monday put on yet another show. But just your thoughts on Grant Haley, Marcus Allen, guys like that who also may or may not have opted to run.
Yeah, it's interesting with Grant Haley because I thought his numbers, especially in the 20-yard shuttle and the three-cone drill, were really good. One analyst had pointed out the fact that even though he doesn't have the size, and he's 5'9", $180, maybe $190 something, and something like that. He's not exactly what NFL teams look for, but when you can run like that, you might find a home as a nickel guy. You might find a home as someone specialist on special teams. I mean, there's a way, if you can run like that, they're going to find a way to use you. So I think he helped himself significantly with those numbers that he put up. Pretty sure his shuttle time was the best at the combine, tied with only one other guy. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, that says all you need to know about what kind of speed he ran. When you talk about Marcus Allen, it was tough to follow the safeties on Monday. There was just not a lot of conversation about those guys. Obviously, you mentioned Apke sort of stood out, but when it came to the overall trying to evaluate from afar, it was tough. It was. I mean, he chose not to run.
Right.
And I think that was interesting because I think that's the one question teams have, the one thing that teams want to see, because at Penn State, he was asked to be down in the box. He was asked to play the run a lot, and I think teams want to see what he's able to do. Now, he did do the ball drills, and everything seemed to go fine with that, but teams are definitely going to be keeping a close eye on what he does when he gets the run. And then, before we get to Apke, Jason Cabinda, of course, had a medical exemption. We don't know much about that.
Yeah.
But I think it was a missed opportunity, an unfortunate one for him, because I think teams wanted to see what he could do. Granted, the off-field stuff is important. You can't deny that. But at the same time, I think teams would have liked to see a little bit more of what he could do, and it also would have gave him a benchmark to see what he needed to work on at Pro Day, but unfortunately he wasn't able to work out.
One note on Marcus Allen, Ian Rappaport of the NFL Network reported over the weekend that a couple teams requested that Marcus work out with the linebackers, do some linebacker drills. It's kind of maybe where this might be headed. A lot of I think some NFL teams are curious about him maybe playing a hybrid safety linebacker role that's kind of emerged in the NFL, where you're almost an outside linebacker. He's big enough, I think, or getting close to being that size, so that could help his stock. But I am curious to see when he does run a 40, how fast he really is, because if he can't crack 4.6. I think that's probably a little bit of a problem.
Right.
Somebody who did, Greg Pickel, crack 4.6. What would you have said if I told you before the combine that Troy Apke would have a faster 40 time than Saquon Barkley?
You know what? The straight line speed is something he did in high school.
Right.
So if you thought enough about it, you may have been able to think it'd be close. I don't know if you would have thought it'd be as significant of a difference as it was, but. This is a guy that was a Whippeal State champion in the 100-meter dash. He finished on the podium at States as a senior. I mean, he came as a wide receiver, and one of the big things Penn State liked about him at the time was his speed. So they flipped him to the other side of the ball because they had a logjam at wide receiver.
Yeah.
But I think that, like I said, I'm not sure if you would have ever expected him to be quite that fast, but certainly, you could see it coming. There's no question about that. So I don't know. It was impressive. There's no doubt about that. Deion Sanders obviously more impressed than just about anybody.
Right.
Mike Mayock actually seemed to be a little bit unsurprised. Almost like he could have saw this coming. I'm not sure if that was the case, or if he was just so tired from 6 days of combine TV and about hours of film before that. But Troy Apke maybe helped him. He's among the guys that helped himself the most because the one phrase you kept hearing was he's a back to the tape guy now.
Yeah. So he ran a 4.35 his first attempt, and then I think he followed it with a 4.39.
Yep.
Saquon, I think, was 4.41 was his best time. My only question about Apke is, and so where was the speed when he was at Penn State? He had a good senior year, but I never really saw that speed really on display at Penn State at any time.
Yeah.
They never really used him as a returner. He played safety, but I mean, there weren't many splash plays where you saw, wow, this guy's really fast.
Yeah.
So I'm just curious if that speed, it's one thing to have track speed,
right, but
will that speed translate to the football field? Yeah. And I'm not saying that it can't, but I never really saw it a lot at Penn State. Hopefully, though, this performance will be one. Well, he's now clearly in the draft discussion. He had the MVP honors at the one bowl game. So I think he's gone from a player that, hey, is he a free agent? Is he going to get drafted? It looks like he's certainly going to get drafted.
Yeah, I think that barring something crazy happening at Pro Day that or of course the only negative that could come out of this is that teams take a really closer look at his film and say, yeah, this guy's just fast. And
right.
I mean, that's the one concern. And I think that you make a good point that I think that was the one, if you followed Penn State, or even if you were from afar watching this team, that was the one thing you said, where was this speed at on the field? Of course, it's one thing to run it in a straight line in shorts in February, and another thing to do it in October in a game. I mean, let's be honest, sometimes the best speed he had was when he was chasing guys at Ohio State in the fourth quarter. I mean, down the field. I mean, that's just what it was. So I think that's why, one of the reasons he was in the draft spot that he was. But the thing that I think that NFL teams will say is that we can find a way to use that. He doesn't necessarily have to do this or that. He can do this one specific thing. You mention it all the time. It's such a specialization game anymore. Someone can find a way to specialize that kind of speed. He's going to have a home for someone. There's no question about it.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about the current team here on the Penn State Blitz. Andre White is a player, a high school player that Penn State is very interested from the Harrisburg area.
Yeah.
There's been some news with him recently, and it's all good.
Yeah, so while former players were standing out in Indianapolis, he left Harrisburg in Pennsylvania to go out and work out twice. He's going to do it. First, he was the linebacker MVP of the opening regional in San Francisco. He's going to hit the L.A. version of that event this weekend. And in between, he's going to see USC, Cal, and UCLA. So he's going to check out the West Coast schools. None of them have offered yet. But this is a guy that Penn State offered early. And most thought, well, they just offered him because of his connection to Micah Parsons. You're going to see over the next couple of weeks that, no, this kid's actually really good, and that maybe he was under the radar a bit when Penn State offered, but I think the offer is going to start to come. So good news for Penn State is he's right in their backyard. He's been to Penn State a ton.
Right.
He can go to Penn State whenever he wants. Oh, by the way, Damian Barber's there. Oh, by the way, Micah Parsons is there. Penn State sits in a great spot, but this is a kid that has a chance to shoot his profile up big time before official visit and unofficial visit season starts here soon.
So White is he viewed as at a special position? Is he an athlete?
He's a linebacker right now is what they're looking at him at, but he's the kind of guy that I think as he fills out, there's any number of possibilities, but he's more than likely a linebacker unless he has some kind of significant growth spurt over the next couple of years. Let's
close with one more strength and conditioning round with the current team. We were invited up last week to watch them. They finished the winter conditioning, essentially the running and the lifting, and we were invited up for a lifting to watch them lift weights. And I thought it was pretty revealing, Greg, especially with regard to a couple of January enrollees, Micah Parsons and Gesecki. They're both linebackers, real area of need. And what I saw from that was those guys looked like they're physically ready to help Penn State this year if they can pick up the teaching on the field in spring. Another player I thought that really had transformed himself was Damian Barber. He had added a lot of weight, and he's really increased his lower half. He looks like he can play defensive tackle. Robert Windsor's dropped some weight, but it was interesting to hear Dwight Galt talk about. He felt it was their best conditioning period that they've had in the 5 years he's been there, and he raved about Micah Parsons kind of buying in because he's a five-star kid, and not all five-star kids kind of buy in and become a good teammate right away. But what did you take maybe from Dwight's comments about Micah kind of fitting in right away?
Yeah, I mean, just for starters, talk about a guy that may have made himself some money. That's Dwight Galt.
Yeah.
Between the combine and then this great stretch so far this winter, and really the whole time he's been here. I mean, the guy's he's a straight shooter, and obviously the kids have responded to him and his staff and the way they work. So I think that the big thing for me to take away from that was that Micah did what, 13 reps of squat reps of 325 pounds, something ridiculous. And I think his comment was something like, "Why are you surprised? Like this is a guy that was supposed to come in and do that stuff." But I thought it was good news to hear just everything's going as planned, everything is as expected. Because keep in mind, this is a guy that in a pretty big way is learning a new position if they want to try him at middle linebacker. There's a lot to figure out for him. So the fact that he can get all this out of the way now should help him come spring practice time. He'll know the routine. He'll know what to do. So I thought that was key. And the biggest thing that jumped out to me, though, Bob, is a guy that we've hardly ever talked about.
Right.
I'm not sure which one you're thinking of, but for me, it's Johnny Patricia. Because we talked about Troy Apke and Marcus Allen leaving, and here comes this group of safeties we don't know a whole heck of a lot about. Aaron Monroe, Nick Scott, John Patricia, they've all been around a while. They all haven't played a whole lot. So the fact that John Patricia, a guy that's seemingly been hurt quite a bit, is making some strides, perhaps he's next in line. We'll have to wait and see. Obviously, Lamont Wade, Jonathan Sudo, and the two guys that have been talked about the most. So I thought the pub for Patricia was interesting.
Yeah, and as no surprise, he really is a big fan of Juwan Johnson, who physically, he looks like the most imposing wideout I think that I've ever seen at Penn State. He is really like, you could almost look at him as like a tight end, but he can run. I think he is sitting on a huge year.
And he was.
And as for a telltale sign, Will Fries, I think, is really kind of locked in, and he's bought in. He's gotten stronger. I think he's got a big future at Penn State as well.
Yeah, and the one thing about Juwan too is that he's working out with Eli Manning and Odell Beckham and all these other guys at down in New Jersey with some other guys, because it is spring break for Penn State. So there's guys that are getting out and working out, and I think you're going to see a big difference. We saw that last year. Remember Saquon Barkley, Marcus Allen, Mark Allen, some other guys went to Florida to work out. There's probably some guys there just because we haven't seen it yet doesn't mean they're not there. So these guys aren't wasting their time, and I think that it's going to be a big deal come spring practice, which starts here pretty soon.
All right, we're getting close to the end of the Penn State Blitz. I'm not sure if we're there yet. Are we taking any questions or comments? We are not, Greg Pickel.
We are not.
So I think
ready for next week.
I think that is our cue to wrap up this edition of the Penn State Blitz. What a performance by Penn State at the NFL Scouting Combine, and I can't wait for Pro Day on March 20th to see just how crazy the attendance is from the NFL teams. I think it is going to be a place that everyone's going to want to be there.